People love the last episode.
Really?
Yes, it seems like this format really clicks.
It's like they are eavesdropping on a conversation between doubt and clarity.
Exactly.
So, should we do another one? What do you think?
About what?
Maybe where it all began
Plato?
and Aristotle?
Perfect. Let's do it. So, we're heading back to ancient Greece,
Exactly.
and we have the two heavyweights, Plato and Aristotle. Two names that pretty much shaped how we think about everything.
Yes, you don't get much more foundational than these two.
Right. Like their ideas are still shaping how we think about, well, so many things.
Art, education, politics, you name it.
Okay, so we are starting with a concept that might sound familiar, mimesis.
Ah, the art of imitation. But wait, before you picture someone mimicking a celebrity, it's a way deeper than that.
Oh,
Yeah, for Plato and Aristotle, mimesis isn't about surface level mimicry.
then?
It's about imitating the reality and what role art plays in all of that.
Hmm.
Which brings us to the first major controversy.
Plato banned poetry.
Yes, from his ideal republic.
Does he have a republic?
Wait, first things first. We are talking about poetry here.
I'm a big fan of poetry, so I'm already a little bit suspicious of Plato here.
Well, you are not alone, but to understand his reasoning, we need to start with his theory of forms.
Forms, like those geometric shapes we learned about in school.
Not quite.
So, what are these forms?
For Plato, forms are the true reality, the eternal blueprints behind everything we see in the physical world.
Blueprints. So, like imagining a perfect apple.
Exactly. The apple you hold is just a copy, an imperfect reflection of the ideal appleness.
Okay, so here go the apples, and the doctors they kept away returned. So, tell me about appleness.
And the thing is, the perfect apple exists only in ideas.
Got it. The apple we see in reality is an apple like copy of that idea.
Apple and everything in the physical world is just a shadow of these perfect forms. And you know what happens when we turn that apple into art?
What?
We copy that apple like copy again on our canvas.
Okay, you mean art becomes an imitation of an imitation.
Exactly, twice removed from the true reality of the forms.
So, first we have ideal forms, then physical reality, and finally artwork.
Right. And Plato is not too happy about that
Why not?
because art is too far removed from the real reality.
Real reality. That's intense.
You know, Plato is worried about the emotional power of art,
Oh, I get that. Emotions. They always stir up trouble.
don't they? Plato believed reason was the key to a good life, and emotions were distractions, pulling us toward the irrational.
So, poetry, with all its emotional intensity, was like a detour off the rational path.
It was a dangerous indulgence, like eating too much dessert.
That's vivid. But it was not just poetry, right? He had issues with tragic plays too.
Yes, he worried that watching stories of suffering and loss would make people overly emotional, even weak.
Hmm.
He also feared it could inspire people to imitate the bad behaviors they saw on stage.
Like a moral infection.
Kind of. He also had this idea about poets and performers being interpreters of interpreters.
Yes, I remember you mentioning that earlier. Something about magnet and iron rings.
Exactly. It's from Plato's Ion. Picture a magnet, which represents the muse, the source of poetic inspiration.
Got it. So the muse is like the ultimate influencer.
Right. And then the poet, inspired by the muse, is like the first iron ring on that magnet. The performer of the poem is the next ring, and so on.
And each ring gets a little farther from the original source, right?
Precisely. It's like a game of telephone where the message gets more distorted with each retelling.
So for Plato, this distortion is a problem because True knowledge should come from reason and philosophical inquiry, not from blindly mimicking someone else's words.
You got it. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Plato's critique of poetry. But I have a feeling we might have a different perspective waiting in the wings.
Oh, I am definitely sensing a counter argument brewing.
You know it. And that's where Aristotle steps in. Things get really interesting. But let's take a quick break before we dive into his defense of poetry.
Can't wait. Come on, be quick. Okay, we are back.
We are
So, we know Plato wasn't a fan of poetry.
not a fan at all.
But what about his star student, Aristotle?
He wasn't about to let poetry get tossed aside without a fight.
And rightly so.
You know Aristotle, always up for a good philosophical debate, and in this case, he had some seriously strong arguments in favor of poetry and imitation in general.
So, where does he start? I mean, Plato's whole theory of forms, it's a pretty convincing argument against art as a whole.
True, and Aristotle agreed that the sensory world isn't the ultimate reality. But here is the twist. Aristotle believed that imitation, mimesis, it's actually how we learn and make sense of the world. It's not a distortion of reality, it's a pathway to understanding.
Wow, that's a radical shift in perspective.
It is. Think about it. From the moment we are born, we are imitating. We copy our parents, we mimic sounds, we learn through observation and imitation.
True. That's how we pick up language and social skills.
Exactly. For Aristotle, imitation is a fundamental human instinct. It's not just a tool for learning, it's how we make sense of the world.
And poetry operates on that instinct?
Right. It allows us to experience a whole range of emotions and situations in a safe, fictional space.
That makes sense. Like, you can read about a tragic hero and feel pity and fear without actually being in any real danger.
Yes, and for Aristotle, that experience can actually be beneficial. He talks about this concept called catharsis.
Catharsis sounds intense.
It is, but in a good way. Catharsis, it's like purification of the emotions. By experiencing these strong feelings in a fictional context, we can learn to understand and manage them better in real life.
So instead of making us weak and irrational, as Plato feared, art could actually make us more emotionally intelligent.
That's the idea. Aristotle believed that by engaging with these powerful stories, we develop empathy. We learn to confront difficult emotions and we come out stronger on the other side.
Like emotional weightlifting.
Yes, and Aristotle didn't stop there. He argued that poetry could be even more philosophical than history.
Wait, how is that possible?
Because history focuses on specific events, right?
Right?
What happened, when, to whom. But poetry, it deals with universals, the truths about human nature that go beyond time and space.
So, while history might tell us about one king who made a terrible decision, but a tragedy, a play like Oedipus Rex, it explores the universal themes of fate, free will, the consequences of our actions.
Indeed, and by engaging with those themes, we gain insights into human nature, into ourselves that can help us to make better choices, to live better lives.
Makes sense.
And you know, Aristotle was very clear that poets, they are not just tellers of facts, they are creators, they are making stuff up.
Wait, but making up things can distort truth, isn't it?
Or they can reveal even deeper truth if they are well constructed, deeper than a simple historical account ever could.
Poetic truth, you mean?
Yes, and for Aristotle, a good poem or play, it should be plausible. It should feel true to human experience, even if it is not factually accurate.
So it's not about literal accuracy. It's about capturing the essence of human experience, the emotional reality.
Exactly. And in doing so, poetry helps us grow, connect, and understand ourselves and others.
Wow, Aristotle really turns Plato's argument on its head.
He does, and in doing so, he lays the groundwork for centuries of thinking about art and its purpose, about the power of storytelling to shape our understanding of the world and of ourselves.
It's incredible how these ancient debates still resonate with us.
That's the power of timeless ideas.
But are ideas enough? What about actions?
What do you mean?
I mean, they talked about understanding the world. Didn't they also talk about shaping it?
Oh, they did, but their answers were very different.
Of course.
One thing they both agreed on, though, was the importance of virtue.
Yes, for both of them, the ultimate goal was to live a good life, a virtuous life.
But they had very different ideas about how to get there.
Yes, their methods.
And those different ideas, they led them to some pretty different conclusions about the ideal state.
Ah, so now we are talking about the Republic.
Yes, that's where the fireworks start.
Bring it on. I am ready for the show.
But shouldn't we take a quick break first?
Oh, yes. Let's give our audience a chance to mimic an ideal action.
What's that?
Like, share, subscribe. So, we are back.
Okay, so before we get into the new stuff, let's quickly sum up what we have covered so far.
Good idea. So, we have got Plato, the champion of reason and control, suspicious of emotions and the chaos art can bring.
Right, always trying to keep things in check.
And then we have got Aristotle, more open to, shall we say, being human.
Exactly. And now we see how these ideas come together in their visions of the ideal society.
Okay, so Plato's Republic first. I am imagining something super structured.
You bet. Plato is not messing around. He wants a society built on reason, where everyone knows their place, where everyone acts for the good of the whole.
Sounds a bit like an ant colony. Everyone has got a job to do.
Well, a little more complex than that. Plato believes that most people aren't capable of governing themselves wisely. They need guidance.
So enter the philosopher kings.
Yes, the ones who managed to leave the cave.
Wait, cave? What are you talking about?
The allegory of the cave. It's one of Plato's most famous ideas.
Okay, tell me more.
Imagine people living in a cave, chained in such a way that they can only see shadows on a wall in front of them.
Shadows? Shadows of what?
Shadows of objects being moved behind them. There's a fire behind the objects, and the light casts those shadows. That's all the people have ever seen. So they believe the shadows are reality.
But the shadows are just reflections of the real objects.
Exactly. Plato uses this to show that most people only see illusions, not true reality.
And how does one get to see the true reality?
That's the tricky part. One person is freed and turns around. At first, the fire hurts his eyes. It's uncomfortable to see beyond the shadows, but as he adjusts, he realizes there is much more to reality. Eventually, he steps out of the cave into the sunlight, and that's when he sees the real world.
That's just one man. And others?
The freed person goes back to share what he has discovered. He tells them about the fire, the objects, and the world outside.
And
And they laugh at him, call him crazy, and refuse to believe there is anything beyond the shadows they have always known.
that's depressing.
It is. Plato says they might even become hostile. They are so used to their reality that they reject anything that challenges it.
So, no happy ending?
Plato doesn't say for sure, but he suggests that with time and effort, the freed person might convince a few to question their reality and seek the truth themselves.
Ah, so that's what philosopher kings do. Lead people out of the cave and guide them to the sun.
Exactly. They are the ones who understand the forms and help others see the bigger picture.
Sounds good on paper, but who decides who gets to be a philosopher king?
Well, that's a debate for another day. For now, let's stick with Plato's vision.
Alright.
So, in this ideal republic, art has a very specific function.
But wasn't Plato so very much anti-art?
Unless it could be used to shape moral character.
A kind of like moral propaganda.
You could say that only the good stuff is allowed. Stories that promote courage, temperance, justice.
And anything that might stir up trouble, that's a no-go.
Exactly. No depictions of gods misbehaving or heroes giving in to passions.
So, censorship.
Yep, Plato worried that art could corrupt morals.
No heavy metals in the Republic.
Definitely not. And speaking of shaping character, education is huge for Plato.
Focused on nurturing reason, right?
Right. Children would be carefully guided by wise teachers, exposed to uplifting stories and myths, trained in philosophy and logic.
Sounds like an intense curriculum. No time for fun in Plato's world.
Well, maybe a little, but the focus was on intellectual growth and virtue.
Okay, so we have got Plato's superstructured, reason-driven republic. What about Aristotle? How is his ideal state different?
Well, Aristotle agrees with Plato that virtue is important, but he's got a more expansive view of human nature.
You mean more room for individual expression?
Exactly, and that plays out in how he imagines the ideal state. For Aristotle, it's not just about reason, it's about cultivating the whole person.
Mind, body, and spirit.
Yeah, and that includes art, appreciating and even creating it.
Because for Aristotle, imitation, mimesis, it's not something to be feared. It's a natural human impulse that helps us to understand the world.
Right? And a well rounded education should include exposure to all kinds of art, even tragedy.
Because they can help us develop empathy. They can make us more emotionally intelligent.
Right.
It's all about finding that balance, right? Reason and emotion, order and freedom.
Yes, and Aristotle wanted a society that encouraged citizens to reach their full potential, to participate in civic life, to think for themselves.
More democratic then.
Aristotle believed ordinary citizens with the right education could contribute to the common good. They don't need a philosopher king to tell them what to do.
What a contrast. Plato's utopia with philosopher kings versus Aristotle's dynamic participatory state.
Two very different blueprints for the good life,
Right.
and both are still so relevant.
They sure are.
Even though neither of these ideal states ever actually existed in the real world, they have had a huge impact on.
I mean, it's amazing to think about these philosophers from thousands of years ago. They're still shaping how we think about art, education, politics.
Right, their questions, their arguments,
Mostly arguments, right?
even challenge your teacher.
Yes, with fresh ideas.
How cool, isn't it? And that's why they are still relevant today.
And on that note, we will wrap things up for today.
Okay, so dear listeners, we'll leave you with something to ponder.
Whose vision resonates with you more?
Do you lean towards Plato's emphasis on order and control?
Or do you find yourself drawn to Aristotle's more expansive, more dynamic view of human nature and society?
There is no right or wrong answer. The important thing is to keep thinking, keep questioning.
And keep watching NibblePop
We will come back again soon with another session of LitChat.
to clear doubts and doubt clarity.
Till then,
Stay curious.
stay subscribed.
Bye bye.